you ever walked out of a party at sunrise, your head still humming with laughter, your heart strangely empty, and thought, was that joy? Or was it loneliness wearing perfume? That quiet ache, that soft disillusionment is exactly what The Sun Also Rises captures. A book about people trying to feel alive in a world that has already broken them. Written by Ernest Hemingway in 1926, this novel became the defining voice of what Gertrude Stein called the lost generation. Hemingway himself was the myth and the man, a war hero, a journalist, a wanderer who turned brevity into beauty. He wrote with the rhythm of someone who had heard death whisper too close and decided to answer with style. Though The Sun Also Rises never won a major award upon publication, its impact was enormous. Critics hailed it as a new kind of writing, raw, direct, and stripped of all illusion. And it secured Hemingway's place among the literary greats long before his later Nobel Prize in 1954. Set between the cafes of Paris and the bull rings of Spain, the story follows Jake Barnes and a circle of expatriates drifting through the wreckage of post-World War I Europe. Their conversations are witty, their nights endless, and their pain almost invisible until you listen closely. In one of the book's most haunting lines, Jake tells Brett Ashley, the woman he loves but can never have, "Isn't it pretty to think so?" That sentence alone feels like a generation's epitaph, tender, bitter, and utterly human. If you love stories that make you think and feel at the same time, you're in the right place. This is Echoes of Books, where we explore how literature still breathes inside us. So if you enjoy deep dives into classic novels and the lives behind them, consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, or supporting us through a small donation. Every gesture helps us keep this quiet conversation between readers alive. The Sun Also Rises Paris, sometime in the 1920s. The war has ended, but the noise inside people's heads hasn't. The streets are filled with music and smoke, with Americans and Brits drinking to forget the years they can't recover. In that golden yet ghostly city lives Jake Barnes, a journalist who seems calm, witty, even content. But beneath the cool surface lies an unspoken wound, one left by the war, one that has changed him forever. Jake's injury has made him impotent, and in Hemingway's quiet, elliptical way, this single fact drives the emotional core of the story. Jake loves Lady Brett Ashley, a woman as magnetic as she is untouchable. Brett is modern before modernity had a name. She cuts her hair short, wears men's clothes, and walks into bars as if the world belongs to her. But her freedom carries a quiet sadness. She is engaged to a bankrupt drunk named Mike Campbell, pursued by the insecure writer Robert Cohn, and adored, silently, faithfully, by Jake. Hemingway sketches their triangle not with melodrama, but with exquisite restraint. Every glance, every unfinished sentence between Jake and Brett holds more ache than 100 love declarations. Around them spins the restless orbit of expatriates, that drifting band of post-war souls who came to Paris chasing life, but mostly found its hangover. There's Bill Gorton, Jake's wisecracking American friend, whose humor barely hides the fatigue of a man who has seen too much. There's Cohn, the outsider, Jewish, idealistic, yearning for romance in a cynical world, who becomes the target of everyone's irritation, perhaps because he still believes love can save him. Hemingway doesn't shield his characters from their ugliness. The way they mock and wound Cohn says as much about their despair as about prejudice. When Brett's restlessness grows unbearable, the group decides to escape to Spain. First, they stop in Burgueta for a fishing trip, one of those rare, peaceful interludes in Hemingway's fiction where the world seems right again. The air is cool, the trout flash silver in the stream, and for a few pages, life feels simple, even pure. It's as if the story pauses to let everyone breathe before plunging back into chaos. Then they travel to Pamplona, just in time for the San Fermin fiesta, where bulls thunder through the streets and the wine never stops flowing. Here, the novel explodes into motion. The days blur in sun and music, the nights in dancing and jealousy. Brett falls for Pedro Romero, a 19-year-old bullfighter whose grace in the ring feels like a revelation. Hemingway writes of Romero with near religious awe, his poise, his courage, his artistry. In him, the lost generation glimpses something they've forgotten: discipline, meaning, a kind of sacred beauty that still exists amid ruin. But Brett's love for Romero unravels the fragile balance of the group. Cohn's jealousy erupts into violence. Mike sinks deeper into drunken self-pity. Jake watches everything disintegrate, unable to stop it. After the fiesta, the party is over, literally and spiritually. The characters scatter like ashes after a fire. Romero returns to his world of blood and ritual. Cohn disappears in shame, and Brett sends Romero away, admitting she would ruin him. There is a quiet wisdom in her decision, an understanding that her longing, so intoxicating, also destroys what it touches. In the final scene, Jake meets Brett in Madrid. The fiesta is long over. The light has changed. They ride together in a taxi through the empty streets, the air thick with everything unsaid. Brett sighs. "We could have had such a damned good time together." Jake answers softly, "Yes. Isn't it pretty to think so?" Hemingway ends there, not with resolution, but with acceptance. It is a goodbye disguised as a wish. Behind that single line lies the whole emotional geography of the novel. Love that cannot be fulfilled, courage that cannot repair, people who keep living because there is no other choice. Hemingway doesn't give us hope in the sentimental sense. He gives us endurance. The fiesta ends, the hangover begins, and still, the sun also rises. In a world of motion and emptiness, that simple truth feels almost sacred. Life goes on, even when we no longer know why. The structure of Drift, how the plot mirrors the mood, if you try to describe the structure of the sun. Also Rises, it feels deceptively simple. A group of friends goes from Paris to Spain, drinks too much, falls in and out of love, and returns to where they began. But beneath that easy rhythm lies a haunting pattern. The story moves like a tide. It advances and retreats, flows and pauses, always carrying a quiet undertow of meaning. Hemingway's structure is not about events, it's about atmosphere. It doesn't lead us somewhere new. It makes us feel the ache of going nowhere. The novel begins in Paris, that city of endless cafes, cigarette smoke, and the sound of glass on glass. Everything in these opening chapters feels circular. Jake and his friends drift from bar to bar, their conversations looping around the same half-sincere jokes, the same stories. The repetition is deliberate. It captures the disoriented rhythm of a generation that has lost its sense of direction. The war is over, but the battlefield remains inside them. When Jake writes, when he walks the streets, when he watches Brett flirt and vanish again, we sense that he's living in a fog of unfinished days. Then the story shifts, southward to the still mountains of Spain. The movement feels like a deep breath, the kind you take after holding one for too long. Hemingway creates this sense of release with silence. The Bourguette fishing trip, for example, slows everything down. The river flows in quiet sentences, trout flash in the current, and the men talk about nothing at all. But this nothing matters. It's the closest they come to peace, to something resembling purpose. The structure of the novel mirrors a human heartbeat. It quickens, slows, pauses, then rushes again into chaos. Pamplona, the third act, explodes with motion. Hemingway stretches time here. Each day of the fiesta feels both endless and fleeting. The crowd swells, the music rises, the bulls charge through narrow streets, and the characters, caught in the pulse of it all, lose themselves completely. The narrative itself becomes drunk. Sentences shorten, scenes blur, laughter and violence intermingle. You can almost hear the rhythm shift from the slow pulse of Borghese to the fever of the fiesta. Hemingway doesn't describe the loss of control. He enacts it. The structure becomes the emotion. After the chaos, the story collapses into quiet. The journey ends not with catharsis, but exhaustion. Madrid feels drained, hollow, as if the novel has finally run out of light. The fiesta's colors fade to gray, and that, in a way, is the book's secret architecture, an emotional arc disguised as geography. The Paris scenes vibrate with cynical chatter, the Spanish countryside offers purity and pause, the fiesta burns with intensity, and the final pages leave only the ash of what was beautiful and brief. Hemingway builds his novel like a moral landscape, each place revealing a different state of being. What makes this structure powerful is how it resists resolution. In most stories, the journey changes the characters. Here, the journey exposes the truth that change itself might be impossible. The same despair that begins the book quietly closes it. Jake and Brett are back where they started, together apart, still circling the same question. How do you live when meaning is gone? The sun rises, the sun sets, and everything repeats. The novel becomes a loop, not a line, mirroring the existential fatigue of the post-war world. Even the title hints at this cycle. It's taken from Ecclesiastes, "One generation passeth away, and another generation cometh. But the earth abideth forever. The sun also ariseth, and the sun goeth down." In Hemingway's hands, that biblical rhythm turns from consolation into irony. The world endures, yes, but endurance is not the same as purpose. The novel's structure reminds us that survival itself can be both miracle and punishment. And yet, within this drift, there is grace. In the repetition of days, in the small details, the clink of a glass, the shimmer of light on water, Hemingway finds a strange beauty. His structure teaches us that even in stasis, emotion moves. The story doesn't build upward like a climax. It deepens inward, layer by layer, until we reach that quiet line in Madrid. Isn't it pretty to think so? By then we understand that nothing has changed, and that this, somehow, is what it means to be alive. The iceberg beneath the words, style as emotion. When people talk about Hemingway, they always mention his iceberg theory. It's the idea that a story should show only 1/8 of its meaning. The rest should remain submerged, invisible but felt. In The Sun Also Rises, that philosophy isn't just a stylistic trick. It's the emotional DNA of the novel. Hemingway writes as if every word has been stripped of decoration, boiled down to bone. But underneath that spareness lies an ocean of longing, guilt, and tenderness. The emotion isn't on the page, it's between the lines. Hemingway once said that if a writer knows enough about what he's writing, he can omit things and the reader will still feel them. That's exactly what he does with Jake Barnes. Jake never talks directly about his injury or his heartbreak. He jokes, he observes, he orders another drink. But the rhythm of his sentences, short, clipped, refusing to linger, betrays the weight of what he won't say. When Jake describes Brett walking away, he doesn't cry out or confess love. He simply writes, "I watched her walk up the street and saw her turn the corner." 8 plain words, yet the ache behind them feels immense. That's Hemingway's genius. He makes silence speak. Every omission becomes an invitation for the reader to feel. In a way, Hemingway writes with absence. What's missing, the love scene, the confession, the dramatic outburst, is exactly what makes the novel pulse with emotion. We are forced to imagine what Jake cannot express. It's empathy through subtraction. The rhythm of the prose also mirrors Jake's inner life. Notice how the sentences move, steady, restrained, almost hypnotic. We ate lunch and drank wine. The waiter brought coffee. The afternoon was hot and lazy. The repetition of simple actions gives the writing a musical rhythm, but also a sense of emptiness. Life happens, yet nothing changes. Hemingway's style turns monotony into meaning. It shows us the slow erosion of feeling in a world numbed by war and excess. But within that restraint, flashes of lyricism break through, sudden and breathtaking. When Hemingway describes Spain, his words glow with reverence. The hills across the valley of the Ebro were long and white. On this side there was no shade and no trees, and the country was brown and dry. The simplicity of the description hides its poetry. The sunlight, the dryness, the endless hills. They're not just landscape, they're inner weather. Spain becomes the opposite of Paris, clean, elemental, stripped of illusion. Hemingway's sentences breathe more freely there, as if the prose itself has been healed by the open air. That shift in tone is deliberate. Hemingway believed that style wasn't just how you said something, it was what you believed about the world. In The Sun Also Rises, the language reflects a moral code. The characters who speak simply, directly, without pretension, Jake, Bill, even Romero, are the ones Hemingway respects. The ones who use too many words, Cone with his romantic talk, Mike with his drunken boasting, collapse under their own noise. The clean sentence becomes a kind of ethics, clarity as integrity, restraint as courage. The iceberg theory also extends to emotion. When Jake finally admits, "I can't stand it to think my life is going so fast and I'm not really living it," it's one of the few direct lines of pain in the novel. And precisely because the book has been so quiet until then, that confession hits like thunder. Hemingway earns emotion by withholding it. His restraint gives every rare crack in the surface a seismic force. Even dialogue becomes an exercise in omission. Characters talk in fragments, half joking, half honest. You can't get away from yourself by moving from one place to another, Jake tells Cone. That one line captures the entire post-war malaise. People circling the globe, hoping geography can heal what conscience cannot. Hemingway's characters hide behind wit, but their jokes are defense mechanisms, tiny shields against despair. The irony is that Hemingway's masculine simplicity is often his most emotional tool. His sentences are spare, but they vibrate with sensitivity. When Brett says to Jake, "Oh, darling, I've been so miserable," the sentence is bare, but the space around it feels charged. Hemingway's refusal to dramatize emotion actually amplifies it. We feel the ache precisely because he doesn't tell us how to feel. And maybe that's the secret of Hemingway's style. It's not cold, it's careful. It's not distant, it's disciplined. Beneath the surface, calm lies a storm, and he trusts us to hear it without him pointing to the thunder. His language mirrors the way people truly experience pain, quietly, indirectly, often through routine. A coffee ordered, a cigarette lit, a glance away. Life continues, and that continuation is the tragedy. By the end of the novel, you realize the iceberg metaphor applies not just to Hemingway's writing, but to Jake himself. He lives with his feelings submerged, revealing only the tip. What's visible is composure. What's hidden is devastation. And maybe that's why his voice feels so intimate. We recognize that kind of silence. It's the same one we use when we say we're fine but aren't. Hemingway's minimalism doesn't minimize emotion. It makes emotion inevitable. His sentences are like bare bones, but bones hold the shape of what once lived. The iceberg doesn't just conceal, it preserves. Beneath its surface lies everything the novel cannot say. Loss, love, endurance, and the quiet, impossible hope that tomorrow, somehow, the sun will rise again. The wound that defines the man, Jake's quiet heroism. Every great Hemingway protagonist carries a wound, and Jake Barnes's is both literal and spiritual. His war injury, unnamed but clear in its implications, has left him impotent. Yet Hemingway never turns it into spectacle or pity. He does something bolder. He transforms it into a metaphor for an entire generation that has lost its ability to believe, to feel fully, to act decisively. Jake's wound is not just physical, it's existential. He stands at the center of a world that has survived catastrophe and can't decide what to do with its survival. What makes Jake such a powerful character is the way he hides his pain behind wit and composure. He's not dramatic, not self-pitying. He works, drinks, listens, observes. When Brett teases him, or when Cohn's immaturity grates on him, he simply smiles. The surface calm is misleading, but that's the point. Hemingway gives us a man who understands that to live with a wound, you must learn how to keep it invisible. The real strength lies in restraint. There's an irony here. Jake's wound renders him sexually powerless, yet he possesses an emotional clarity that none of the other men do. Cohn still believes in romantic rescue. Mike hides behind drunken bravado. Bill jokes to survive. Jake alone sees things as they are. He loves Brett deeply, but accepts that love cannot be fulfilled. It's awfully easy to be hard-boiled about everything in the daytime, he says, but at night, it is another thing. That single line tells us everything. His awareness, his exhaustion, his grace. Hemingway captures a kind of heroism that doesn't conquer, it endures. Critics have often called this the code hero, the man who faces chaos with dignity, who refuses self-pity, who measures himself not by victory, but by composure under pressure. Yet in Jake's case, that code feels more fragile, more human. He's not the stoic soldier or the unflinching adventurer. He's the quiet observer whose decency remains intact in a world that rewards noise and cruelty. His courage is moral, not physical. He doesn't fight bulls or men. He fights despair. Jake's behavior toward Brett reveals the depth of his inner code. He never blames her, even when her choices tear him apart. When she runs off with Romero, he helps her get there. When she's broken afterward, he helps her again. He loves her without illusion, without demand. It's love as acceptance, not possession. In an age defined by excess and ego, Jake's gentleness feels radical. Hemingway, often accused of macho minimalism, gives us here something deeply tender, a man who finds nobility in restraint. There's another layer to Jake's heroism. It's the way he maintains dignity without meaning. The war has stripped away the old moral structures, the certainties of faith and honor, but Jake still lives by an unspoken code: precision, honesty, authenticity. He doesn't pretend to know more than he does. When he says, "You can't get away from yourself by moving from one place to another," it's more than advice to Cohn. It's a credo. He understands that the real battleground is internal. The war outside is over. The one inside never ends. This quiet strength has made Jake one of Hemingway's most enduring characters because he feels real. We all know what it means to live with something that can't be fixed, to smile through disappointment, to find small rituals that keep us steady. Hemingway turns that emotional truth into art. He doesn't romanticize Jake's pain, he dignifies it. But perhaps what makes Jake's heroism most moving is its humility. He doesn't call himself brave, he simply keeps going. When Brett says, "We could have had such a damned good time together," and Jake answers, "Isn't it pretty to think so?" that is not resignation, it's grace. In those 6 words, he accepts what life gives and what it withholds. He acknowledges the beauty of an impossible dream and lets it go. In a way, Jake becomes a kind of modern saint of endurance. He doesn't conquer his pain, he coexists with it. He walks through a wounded world with empathy and irony, never giving up his humanity. Hemingway's genius is that he doesn't need to tell us Jake is heroic. We feel it through his silence, through his small acts of kindness, through his refusal to let bitterness define him. Jake's wound may have taken away his ability to fulfill love, but it gave him something else, the ability to understand it. And maybe that's what Hemingway wanted to say, that the real measure of strength is not how loudly you fight, but how quietly you survive. Brett Ashley and the Price of Freedom. Every time Lady Brett Ashley walks into a scene, the atmosphere shifts. Men fall silent, laughter sharpens, and even the air seems to notice her. Hemingway sketches her not as a typical romantic heroine, but as something more volatile, a living contradiction between freedom and despair. Brett is beautiful, charming, brave, and fiercely alive, but she is also restless, haunted, and destructive, especially to herself. She represents everything magnetic about modern womanhood in the 1920s and everything tragic about the loneliness that comes with it. When we first meet Brett in Paris, she enters a smoky bar wearing a tweed suit and a felt hat, masculine in style, dazzling in presence. Hemingway's description is brief but unforgettable. Brett was damned good looking. She wore a slip-over jersey sweater and a tweed skirt, and her hair was brushed back like a boy's. The detail is small, but in 1926, it was revolutionary. Brett's cropped hair, her open sexuality, her defiance of convention, all of it embodied a new kind of woman emerging after the war. She's part of the same social revolution that gave rise to flappers and jazz, women who had seen too much to ever return to polite silence. But Hemingway doesn't present Brett as a symbol to admire or condemn. He gives her contradictions weight. She's both liberating and lost. She can't bear to be contained by marriage, by morality, or even by love itself. She says to Jake, "I'm so miserable," and the line cuts through the novel's glamour like smoke through glass. Her sadness isn't just personal, it's generational. Brett has all the freedom she was told to want, yet none of the peace that was supposed to follow. Critics have long debated whether Hemingway treated her cruelly or sympathetically. Some call Brett a femme fatale, a woman who destroys every man who loves her. Others see her as a victim of a society that gave women desire, but not equality. Both readings are true, and that's what makes her so alive. She's not an idea, she's a person. She wants to be faithful to Jake, but she can't give up the thrill of being wanted. She seeks love in every direction, but finds only mirrors of her own restlessness. Brett's freedom comes at a cost, and Hemingway makes sure we feel it. She loves Jake, but can't be with him. She loves Romero, but knows she'll ruin him. She even seems to love her own destructiveness, as if pain is the only proof she's still alive. When she tells Jake to help her send Romero away, it's one of the most human moments in the book. For once, she chooses not desire, but mercy. That choice doesn't redeem her entirely, but it makes her real. There's a moment during the fiesta when Brett watches Romero in the bullring, her eyes filled with something like reverence. He's young, pure, fearless, a man unbroken by compromise. In him, Brett sees a version of herself she's lost, courage without regret. But her love for him is doomed from the start. When she later confesses, "I can't stand it to think my life is going so fast and I'm not really living it," it feels like a confession for an entire generation. They've survived the war, but they no longer know what living means. In a feminist light, Brett can be seen as one of modern literature's first women to claim ownership of her body and her choices, even when those choices bring her pain. She drinks, she travels alone, she refuses to apologize for her lovers. Yet Hemingway also shows how society punishes her for that independence. The men around her are free to indulge themselves, but Brett's freedom is treated as scandal. She's admired and despised in the same breath, a paradox still familiar today. There's also something spiritual about Brett's tragedy. In a world stripped of faith, she's searching for transcendence through love and pleasure, trying to fill the space where belief used to live. Each affair is a small attempt at resurrection. Each goodbye is another tiny death. Hemingway never mocks her for it. He understands that longing itself can be sacred, even if it leads nowhere. By the end, when she sits beside Jake in Madrid, tired and stripped of illusion, we sense the quiet transformation she's undergone. The party girl of Paris has become a woman who finally understands the weight of what she's done, to others and to herself. "We could have had such a damned good time together," she says. "It's not just about Jake anymore. It's a lament for the whole modern world, for the dream of love that civilization promised, but never delivered." Brett's story is not a fall from grace, it's a search for it. She lives in the tension between wanting to be free and needing to belong. And maybe that's why we still recognize her today. She's the person who keeps running towards something beautiful, knowing it will break her heart. Hemingway doesn't punish her for that. He simply lets her exist, luminous and lost, a mirror to everyone who has ever mistaken motion for meaning. In the end, Brett Ashley's greatest tragedy is also her triumph. She refuses to stop feeling. She burns, she breaks, and she keeps moving. In her, Hemingway captures what it means to be human after faith has fallen apart, to chase love even when it hurts, to live beautifully even when the world no longer makes sense. The Ritual of Bulls and Men, Art, Death, and Meaning. Few scenes in literature feel as alive as Hemingway's descriptions of the bullfights in Pamplona. The air quivers, the crowd roars, and time itself seems to slow down. You can almost smell the dust and the sweat, hear the horns cutting through the silence before the cheer. To Hemingway, the bullfight was not merely sport, it was ritual, a ceremony of courage and beauty, where life and death waltzed in perfect rhythm. And in The Sun Also Rises, this ritual becomes the novel's beating heart. Everything the characters have been searching for, meaning, purity, grace, appears for a moment in the ring. The bullfight is not an escape from chaos, it's a distilled version of it. Within those few minutes of choreography between man and beast, Hemingway finds the order that eludes his drifting generation. He once said that the bullfight was the only art in which the artist was literally in danger of death. For him, that danger was not morbid fascination, but moral clarity. It stripped away everything false. When Jake watches the young matador Pedro Romero in the ring, he sees something the others cannot. Romero is barely 19, but his composure, his poise, feels ancient. He moves with grace under pressure, Hemingway's favorite phrase for the highest form of human courage. Romero doesn't fight for applause or fame. He fights for perfection, the clean kill, the pure line, the moment of absolute control. In him, Jake glimpses the essence of Hemingway's philosophy, the belief that art and honor can redeem a chaotic world, even if only for an instant. For the lost generation, religion had collapsed, politics had failed, and pleasure had become numbing. The bullfight, in its primitive splendor, offers what those modern systems cannot, a form of truth born from risk. When the matador steps into the ring, he accepts the inevitability of death and transforms it into beauty. The act becomes a kind of secular prayer. Hemingway's prose mirrors this tension, precise, rhythmic, almost ceremonial. Romero never made any contortions. Always it was straight and pure and natural in line. In that single sentence, Hemingway elevates style to morality, but the ritual is not without shadow. While Jake sees transcendence, the others see spectacle. Mike mocks, Cone fumes with jealousy, Brett feels desire, and the crowd screams for blood. The purity of Romero's art stands in contrast to the corruption of his audience. Hemingway is painfully aware of that irony. Beauty and brutality coexist here, inseparable. The same hands that applaud the matador's elegance are the ones hungry for violence. It's a microcosm of modernity itself, grace and gore dancing together under the same sun. Romero's relationship with Brett makes this symbolism even sharper. Their affair becomes an extension of the bullfight, he the disciplined artist, she the embodiment of danger. In loving him, Brett disrupts the balance of his art. He's just a boy, she says, and I can't ruin him. Her decision to leave him is the moral echo of the bull ring's fatal discipline. Beauty cannot survive indulgence. Hemingway uses this moment to remind us that passion, like the bullfight, demands sacrifice. To love without destroying is a skill as rare as Romero's perfect thrust. The bullfight also serves as a mirror to Jake's internal struggle. He can appreciate the art but never participate. He's both spectator and victim. Impotent in love, restrained in life, but able to recognize the purity of Romero's act. His admiration for the matador is more than aesthetic, it's spiritual envy. Jake longs for that same sense of purpose, that same unity between action and belief, but he knows he will never have it. Watching Romero is as close as he comes to transcendence. Modern readers sometimes find Hemingway's obsession with bullfighting strange, even barbaric, yet within his philosophy the ritual becomes a metaphor for the human condition. Every life is a bullfight, a confrontation with death that we must navigate with grace. The goal is not to escape mortality, but to face it beautifully. The matador's art becomes Hemingway's moral lesson. If we must die, we should at least die well, with courage and precision, without flinching. Still, the novel doesn't offer easy reverence. The fiesta that surrounds the bullfights descends into drunken chaos, violence, and humiliation. The purity of the ring is swallowed by the ugliness of the crowd. Hemingway is too honest to idealize his own metaphor. The ritual that begins as art ends as excess. And that collapse, that fading from grace to debauchery, is the tragedy of the lost generation itself. They crave meaning but turn it into entertainment. They worship art but consume it until it rots. The final bullfight, when Cohn's jealousy boils over and the group disintegrates, feels like the moral climax of the novel. The fiesta is over. The illusion of control vanishes. What remains is silence. The silence after applause, after death, after love. In that silence, Hemingway reveals the cost of beauty. It exists only in moments, and those moments are always paid for in blood. The ritual of bulls and men is Hemingway's way of showing that art is not an escape from life's violence. It's a form of it. To live meaningfully, to love truly, to create beautifully, all require risk. That's why the novel ends not in triumph, but in quiet acceptance. The matador survives the ring, but only until the next fight. Jake survives his heartbreak, but only until the next dawn. The sun also rises, yes, but it also sets, and we are left to face the dusk with as much dignity as we can muster. Between the lines, language as power. If The Sun Also Rises is about wounds and endurance, it is also about who gets to speak and how language itself becomes a form of control. Hemingway's sentences may be short, but they are never neutral. Every word is chosen with the precision of a knife, cutting away excess to reveal the quiet authority beneath. In this novel, speech and silence are not opposites. They are weapons. Jake Barnes, our narrator, tells the story in first person, but his voice is so measured that we forget how much power it carries. He decides what we see, what we don't, and how we feel about it. We see Cohn through Jake's tired irony. I can't stand him, and yet I pity him. And Brett through his restrained admiration. We trust him because he never raises his voice, but that calm tone is itself a form of manipulation. Hemingway teaches us that control of tone is control of truth. Every time Jake describes a scene, his restraint shapes our sympathy. When he writes, "We went out into the street, the sun was hot, the day was bright," we accept that simplicity as objectivity, but it's not. It's Jake refusing to feel. His language shields him from his own emotions, and by extension, shields us. We are lulled by the cadence of understatement. This is Hemingway's quiet genius. He makes repression sound like clarity. There's also a hierarchy in how the characters use words. Jake, Bill, and Romero speak in Hemingway's clean, masculine rhythm, short, direct, disciplined. Cohn talks too much, filled with romantic cliches. Mike's speech collapses into drunken babble. Brett's language is impulsive and emotionally raw. The way they speak reflects how Hemingway measures worth. Words are not just communication, they are character. To speak clearly is to live truthfully. To overspeak is to reveal weakness. But there's a paradox in this ideal. Hemingway's style, so admired for its precision, is also an act of exclusion. Jake's controlled narration limits not only what we see, but whose pain we understand. Cone, the outsider, is filtered through Jake's contempt. Brett, with her emotional honesty, is captured but never allowed to narrate herself. Even when she confides, "Oh, Jake, we could have had such a damn good time together," the moment belongs to Jake because he decides how it ends. With that devastating line, "Isn't it pretty to think so?" Hemingway makes us fall under the spell of Jake's detachment, and in doing so, reveals how easily perspective can become power. Language in the novel also operates as a moral test. Characters who use words lazily or deceitfully lose credibility. When Cone insists he's in love, his vocabulary collapses into cliches. When Mike mocks him, the cruelty feels sharper because the wit is so exact. Even Brett, for all her charisma, struggles to articulate what she wants. She moves through life with the vocabulary of confession, but not comprehension. She can say, "I'm miserable," but she can't explain why. Hemingway uses that linguistic gap to expose the limits of self-knowledge in the modern world. At the same time, silence in the novel carries enormous weight. When Jake pauses, when sentences end abruptly, when scenes cut off without conclusion, we feel the pressure of what's unsaid. Silence becomes a kind of emotional punctuation. The unspoken words between Jake and Brett hold more meaning than any declaration of love could. Hemingway knew that true emotion often happens in the pauses, in the space where language fails. "You can't get away from yourself by moving from one place to another," Jake says, and we hear the echo of his own truth hiding behind the advice. Hemingway's minimalist dialogue also mirrors the rhythm of jazz, a form built on improvisation and restraint. Each line of conversation feels like a note, the pauses as important as the sounds. It's no coincidence that Hemingway wrote during the rise of the Jazz Age, when music itself was learning to say more by saying less. In The Sun Also Rises, dialogue functions like jazz, syncopated, rhythmic, full of tension between control and release. But perhaps the most subtle use of language as power lies in how Hemingway makes the reader complicit. Jake's calm tone seduces us into agreement. When he dismisses Cone as tedious, we nod along. When he speaks tenderly of Brett, we forgive her flaws. We forget that this is Jake's story, not the truth. Hemingway plays with our trust, reminding us that all narration is manipulation. The novel's moral tension hides inside its syntax. Who gets to tell the story and who gets silenced in the telling? By the end, language itself becomes both armor and art. Jake's words protect him from the chaos that consumes everyone else. His tone is his survival strategy. For Hemingway, style is not decoration, it's ethics. To write cleanly is to live honestly. To control words is to master oneself. Yet paradoxically, that control comes at a cost. Jake's composure distances him from intimacy, from catharsis, from love. His mastery of language saves him, but also isolates him. And maybe that's Hemingway's final paradox. The same clarity that gives the novel its beauty also makes it cold. The same precision that feels truthful also hides emotion. By writing so carefully, Jake becomes both the author and prisoner of his restraint. Hemingway's prose traps him in a perfect sentence, one that keeps him alive but alone. In the world of The Sun Also Rises, language is not just communication, it's identity. It's defense, it's power. And behind every clipped line of dialogue and every quiet description, we can still hear the beating heart Hemingway keeps submerged, steady, wounded, human. The Lost Generation, Still Lost, Context and Afterlife. To understand The Sun Also Rises, you have to imagine the silence after a cannon stops firing. Europe in the 1920s was that silence, a continent shell-shocked by World War I, trying to dance loud enough to drown out the echoes. Hemingway's novel was born out of that silence. out of the dazed glitter of what Gertrude Stein called the lost generation. The phrase wasn't meant to be poetic, it was a diagnosis. An entire generation had come home alive but spiritually unanchored, and Hemingway gave that condition a voice. The war had dismantled more than armies. It had dismantled belief in progress, in morality, in God, in heroism. The people who survived felt like their souls had been rewritten in shrapnel. And in Paris, a strange kind of society emerged. Expatriates, artists, journalists, and soldiers who had traded one battlefield for another. The cafe, the bottle, the bed. Hemingway lived among them. He drank with F. Scott Fitzgerald, sparred with Gertrude Stein, admired Ezra Pound, and absorbed the modernist rebellion against everything old. When he wrote "The Sun Also Rises," he wasn't describing strangers. He was writing from memory, from his own circle of wounded, brilliant wanderers. Hemingway himself carried his own war scar, both physical and invisible. As a young ambulance driver in Italy, he had been hit by mortar fire, and though he recovered, he never stopped writing about men who were hurt but refused to collapse. The code of honor that runs through his work, the stoic dignity, the preference for action over talk, was his response to chaos. The war had taught him that life could end in a second. The only moral stance left was grace under pressure. That belief saturates The Sun Also Rises. Every character in their own way is trying to find something to believe in after belief itself has died. For some, it's love. For others, it's art, money, or drink. The fiesta in Pamplona becomes their substitute for religion, a ritual of blood, rhythm, and ecstasy where, for a few days, meaning seems possible again. But like all rituals in the modern world, it can't last. The hangover always returns. The fiesta ends, the train leaves, the silence falls again. Hemingway's structure mirrors history itself, a burst of hope followed by the same old emptiness. Critics often call The Sun Also Rises the defining novel of the 1920s, but its reach extends far beyond that decade. It became the emotional blueprint for a century of disillusionment. The beat writers inherited its drift, the post-war existentialists its moral fatigue. Even contemporary storytellers, film directors, novelists, and game designers borrow Hemingway's rhythm of beauty and emptiness. When you see a lonely anti-hero drinking in a neon bar, speaking in short, wounded sentences, you're seeing Hemingway's ghost. Yet what makes this novel endure is not its historical importance, but its timeless emotional truth. You don't have to be a soldier or an expatriate to feel what Jake feels, to wake up one morning and realize that the dream you were living no longer means anything. That sense of quiet dislocation still resonates in our own era of endless distraction. We scroll through parties, we chase love and meaning across digital continents, and still we ask the same questions Jake did. What does it mean to be alive when everything feels temporary? The feminist debates around Brett Ashley, the post-colonial readings of the Spanish setting, even the animal ethics critiques of the bullfight. All these modern reinterpretations show that The Sun Also Rises is still being rewritten by its readers. Every generation finds its own reflection in it. For some, it's a cautionary tale about toxic masculinity. For others, a tragic love story. For others still, a hymn to endurance. The fact that it can hold all these meanings is proof of its living pulse. When Hemingway first published the book, he was accused of cynicism, of writing about people without morals. But looking back, you can see that the novel's real tone is not cynicism, but sorrow. Beneath the drinking and the irony lies a deep, aching tenderness for people who keep trying, who keep loving badly but honestly, who keep getting up in the morning even when the world makes no promises. Hemingway may have called them lost, but his art insists that they were still worth finding. And maybe that's the quiet miracle of The Sun Also Rises. It turns moral exhaustion into poetry. It doesn't offer answers, but it dignifies the search. Hemingway's characters are not models to emulate. They're reminders that meaning is not inherited. It's made, moment by moment, often in the dark. The book ends where it begins, yet somehow we feel changed. The repetition is the lesson. Life will go on, indifferent and bright. The sun also rises, and even if we are lost, we rise with it. The beautiful wound that never heals. When the fiesta ends and the lights of Pamplona fade, Hemingway leaves us in a quiet taxi on a hot Madrid afternoon. The city hums softly outside, and in that hush, Brett says the line that haunts readers long after the book closes. "We could have had such a damned good time together," Jake replies. "Isn't it pretty to think so?" It's a line that carries the whole weight of the human condition. Love that can't be lived, dreams that dissolve in the light of day, beauty that exists only because it's fleeting. That final exchange is why The Sun Also Rises still lingers like a taste you can't forget. It isn't a story about triumph, it's a story about endurance, about the quiet grace of people who keep living even when they no longer know why. Hemingway doesn't ask us to admire his characters, he asks us to understand them, to see that in their mistakes, in their failed loves and drunken confessions, there is something profoundly recognizable. Beneath all the bravado and restraint, this is a novel about tenderness, the tenderness of those who can't stop hoping, even after hope has been shattered. Jake's wound, Brett's longing, Cohn's humiliation, Romero's purity, they're all pieces of the same puzzle, how to live without illusions and still care about the world. Hemingway's answer isn't comfort, but clarity. Life hurts. It will go on hurting, and yet somehow the sun also rises. Reading this book today feels eerily familiar. The lost generation wandered through the ruins of war. We wander through the ruins of noise and speed. They drowned their disillusionment in cafes and bullfights. We drown ours in screens and scrolling. But the ache is the same. The need to find meaning in the small, honest gestures that make us human. A shared drink, a quiet joke, a morning when the light feels new again. Hemingway's world reminds us that survival itself can be art if done with honesty and style. If there's one truth that echoes through the novel, it's that beauty doesn't erase pain. It redeems it. Hemingway shows us that what's broken can still shine if we face it with courage, if we carry our losses with a kind of elegance. The book doesn't end with despair, it ends with acceptance. And in that acceptance, there's a strange peace, a reminder that even when everything we love slips through our hands, the light will still find us tomorrow. Before we close this conversation, I want to leave you with a question. Do you think Hemingway was celebrating this lost world or quietly mourning it? Were Jake and Brett tragic because they couldn't be together, or heroic because they still loved despite it? I'd love to hear your thoughts. If this journey through Hemingway's wounded, luminous world spoke to you, consider subscribing to Echoes of Books. Leave a comment, share your reflections, or support the channel so we can keep building this quiet space for readers who believe that literature still matters. Because sometimes the most powerful stories aren't the ones that save us. They're the ones that remind us how to live with what cannot be saved.